Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the next episode of Stream Time Sports. My name is Chris Stone. I'm the community lead, and this is the first episode being recorded in the new year in 2020-25. Those of you that are frequent listeners will know our CEO, Nick Meacham, has been gallivanting from Jamaica to Australia and eventually to Sweden, so he's not with us today. And in his stead, I'm joined with our technology editor, Steve McCaskill. Good friend, Steve McCaskill. Steve, what was the highlight of your Christmas from a sporting perspective?
Oh, well, as a Manchester United fan, there weren't too many. But in general, most years, it's a safe bet to go with the darts, as it is. Most years, it's part of my celebration now. It's now part of my family celebration because I think possibly through Stockholm Syndrome, they just had it on so much, they now think they enjoy the darts, whether they do or not, you know. So, that was probably my highlight of the festive period for sure.
Well, you're selling it a little bit low there, Steve. Were you not there to watch history with Luke Littler?
Yes, I was at the final, which was it was the second final I've been to. The first one was the greatest leg of darts ever. If you YouTube that, you'll know what I mean. But yeah, a historic moment as Luke Littler, the premier youth athlete in world sports, won his first ever world championship against Michael van Gerwen, Alexandra Palace. It was it looked like it was going to be a demolition job at one point, to be honest. He was very much on top in that final. And lots of people who weren't into darts 12 months ago are now tuning in, big fans. It's going a bit more global as well. I think there's a bit more, Littler's just igniting interest everywhere he goes.
Well, it was really interesting you say that from a global perspective, obviously talking very small scale here, but basically the way me and my father started every morning, because I went back to Cincinnati for 12 days, is we started every morning by watching the darts highlights. And I think a lot of credit given to the PDC for how they were able to package those up. Now, I wasn't able to watch the darts live because it was on DAZN. Obviously, I could have paid for a subscription, but given I don't live there long term, I didn't see the point of necessarily doing that. But the PDC does a really great job of packaging up the darts in about a 45-minute video. And by the end of it, my father was fully hooked. I had some cousins come down. They were fully hooked, and we were watching all of the highlights together. And Jenny, my family got really into it. As much for the darts themselves, but also the fans, they loved all the chanting, the songs and things like that. But darts it really is made for TV, the pace that it goes at, and it's kind of the stories it can tell, just a really positive experience this year. And, everyone in America, we'll take it back. Barstool in particular was very focused on. I think if Barstool's talking about it, that's a good sign.
Yeah, I think darts has a couple of things in its favor. One is it's a simple game. Yes, of course, there's rules and there's formats and scoring to understand. Once you do that, you kind of know what's going on. And then, as you say, I think the crowd is the main character. Without the crowd, darts isn't what it is. And I've been playing darts for 20 years, and I have always wondered, is it a practical joke that's gone too far? But in terms of the amount of people go to watch it. But if you go to the darts, you will have a good time. It's great, and I tell you what, it's actually, I think it gets a reputation because everything. It's just about the beer. Yeah, of course, there's the beer there, but it's honestly a really nice day out. It's probably a lot more of it's a lot friendlier than you might think on TV. Everyone just wants to have a good time, and the action on TV has been absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, without getting too sidetracked, I always find it interesting. You put those people at the Alley Pally, they're the friendliest people in the world. If you put them at the Den in Millwall, they're probably the most unfriendly people in the UK. So I find it interesting how different sports, different venues can sort of change people's reaction to alcohol, at least in the UK.
And the one thing I will also say is I've never seen so many children than I have done this year. I've been going to Alley Pally for a couple of years, and there were, again, it's the Littler effect. People happy to bring their kids, particularly to the afternoon session, maybe a bit more than the evening session. But it's definitely a sport that's it's on the up, and I think it's something that even I'm going to say the cynics are now having to accept is fairly part of the landscape, and it's making money.
Well, I think one of the interesting statistics I saw was that this was the largest non-football, soccer, depending on where you're at in the world, event in Sky Sports history. Was the final, something about 3.7 million viewers. But I think I read it was the largest non-football sporting event on Sky Sports.
the 2024 final between Humphreys and Littler was.
Yeah.
This year was slightly down,
Okay.
but it's true. It's not been beaten. I can't really think of much else that might beat it if I'm being honest.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, pretty impressive for a small sport like darts. I shouldn't say small, give respect to them, stand up if you love the darts.
The one thing I will say is I've been trying to verify this fact and find out what metric they're basing it on. But if something like Europe's largest indoor sports league is Premier League darts, and I cannot verify that. I don't know what metric it is because I've been looking against things like EuroLeague basketball and what have you there, and some of the European hockey leagues are quite big, but it's definitely the UK's biggest indoor sports league. That's for sure.
For sure. And, we will move into other sports talk. I know everybody didn't come here for the darts because, as we know, the Christmas holiday season is always very busy for sports. And it was very busy for sports news as well. So we have quite a few big stories to follow up and kind of give our thoughts around, Steve. And the first one we'll start with is a story, we've been following for several months. We've been able to hear from some of the key stakeholders and David Gandler, but it looks like we're starting to finally get some clarity on how the whole saga of Venu Sports is going to play itself out. For those not aware, Venu Sports was a proposed joint streaming venture by ESPN, Fox Sports. Oh, who's the third one I'm missing in that group there?
ESPN, Fox, and Warner Brothers Discovery.
That's the one. Thank you. And at the time when that was first announced, our friend David Gandler and the folks at Fubo Sports filed for basically to make that not happen, an injunction. And they were initially awarded that by the courts. And this is sort of played out. And it seems as though, Steve, as though that is going to be the case. And Venu Sports doesn't look like it's maybe going to happen at this stage, Steve.
I think it's fair to say that Venu Sports is dead in the water at the moment. It's surprising that having potentially cleared a pathway to launch. Let's take it back. We've been covering it a lot. Even you spoke. Also, I think it's going to kill Nick that he can't talk about this week.
There's the DAZN Foxtel story as well. I'm sure people are going to get 2 sessions on this next week's pod when he's back too.
But obviously, you've spoken to David Gandler a couple of times about this, and essentially, Fubo wanted to be able to offer this sports light bundle that Venu wanted to, and it wasn't allowed to because it was constrained by the same carriage conditions as cable companies, which meant that effectively Fubo and other MVPDs were going to get this new competitor that could offer cheaper, more focused packages while not allowing others to do the same thing. And of course, this went through the courts, and it emerged this week that last week rather, that Fubo was going to withdraw its legal objection to Venu Sports. That was part of the plan, and that Fubo was effectively going to merge with Disney's Hulu live TV proposition. So there was going to be a bigger MVPD player in the market because YouTube TV is the big one, the one to beat in the US market at present. So Fubo is going to be better placed to do it. I think there was also some sort of financial compensation as part of that deal. And, it seemed like Fubo played a blinder, and then, Venu was going to be able to launch. And then we got this statement on Friday saying that it's being disbanded. And I think the reason for that is that Dish and DirecTV, who are 2 satellite operators who've got their own issues, they were supposed to be merging, no, they're not. Who knows what's going to happen there? They indicated they would take up the legal mantle and oppose Venu. And I think once it became clear that the legal battle wasn't going away, and that the legal battle could lead to further complications, I cannot remember. I wanted to credit who came up with this, but there was a suggestion that legal battle could perhaps jeopardize the concept of bundling entirely, which would have been an even bigger issue for the channels involved. They just decided it wasn't worth it. That perhaps they should focus on other things. And there's other things to think about. They missed the NFL season, which was what they wanted to do before the injunction. WBD has lost its NBA rights, which means that element of the partnership is it's diminished. And then ESPN is sort of pushing ahead with its own direct consumer proposition. It's agreed carriage deals for what it's calling flagship. It's looking to bolster its own DTC service. And then finally, I guess there was also, who was this for? Who was going to subscribe to Venu? Was it, it kind of was a halfway house, because was it going to appeal to people who just want, it was probably too expensive and too cumbersome for people who wanted streaming, but then also didn't go far enough for people who might have cable. So lots of reasons, I think, are why it's not going ahead. Just in terms of the legal difficulties, the actual appeal of the proposition, and also I think things have just moved on in a year. I think this is a really rapidly changing space.
Yeah, I think the point you touched on there, it almost feels like there was less to fight for when the initial proposal for Venu Sports came out. But as you said, missing the NFL, how the NBA deal ended up working out, the whole proposition of Venu Sports was a little less attractive than it was. And I'm not sure if maybe those businesses that were part of that joint venture maybe thought that it just wasn't worth the fight to continue to do it and look for other alternatives, or just let it die all the same, as opposed to continue to try to fight for it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good way of summing up. I think things have become a bit clearer in the last year as well. Again, Disney and ESPN, there's some real momentum on their side. WBD, it's what's it going to do now? It's not got the NBA. It's sort of maybe it's going to have to put a bit more effort into Max. It's already made steps to bolster the Max sports portfolio. How would that have worked with something like Venu? And then I think the big outlier here maybe is Fox, which said on record that it's not going to prioritize streaming over cable anytime soon. It still sees the benefits of the linear world. Venu, was it the first time that its services were going to be available without a cable subscription? And Chris, the US, you know me, I love the US. I love US sports and everything. The one thing that's always baffled me is that things like Fox, ABC, NBC are in theory available over the air, but people will only watch them on cable or a streaming service. But so the fact that Fox doesn't have its linear feed available as on a direct consumer platform is still a big deal. So that's going to be one to watch. What's Fox going to do? It has been linked with potentially making its content available on ESPN, as an add-on. ESPN's flagship direct consumer service, not ESPN the channel. So that's the outlier there. I just think for everyone else, it's kind of moved on, and it just didn't seem it's not worth the battle. There's less to lose now.
Now, speaking more specifically from a Fubo perspective, whenever we speak to David, given their publicly traded company, there's always pickup on our social channels, performances, because all of the I don't want to disparage them, but the finance bros, you can potentially call them, it's seen that, Fubo's stock has surged by as much as 251% since the announcement of the planned merger with Hulu, which I think we should say, still needs to be legally approved before that can go through. But for Fubo, David Gandler has been, trying to build a disruptor and doing things their own way. What does this mean for Fubo going forward in terms of this larger merger? Is this potentially part of the end game of being acquired by somebody else, that, Fubo might just be moving into something else and it'll just become its own thing? Or what does this mean for the current state of Fubo, or where David Gandler's been trying to drive it over the last few years?
I mean, I said earlier, Gandler's played a blinder, in terms of how he's managed to manage this situation and turn it to Fubo's benefit. The association with Disney elevates Fubo. You talk about the traction that that Fubo and Gandler get on social media every time we talk to them. I would still argue that Fubo is not that well known outside of these circles. It remains a niche product at present, a growing product, and it's definitely trying to disrupt the market with its offering. A formal tie-up with Disney elevates Fubo considerably. It gets people. It's going to be more in the minds of consumers. What Disney's done with Hulu Live TV, I can't actually name the name of the product. I think it's Hulu Live TV Plus or something like that, has always sat kind of awkwardly with Disney and Disney Plus and what Hulu is. So it's going to be a bit more of a focused area, I think, for both companies. Well, Fubo is going to be a stronger place to take on YouTube TV in the MVPD space. With regards to an acquisition, I mean, I don't know. I mean, anyone that you think of that would be eyeing up someone like Fubo to bolster their strategy? Maybe one of the main providers looking to go beyond cable, but I definitely think Fubo's in a better place. It's got more legitimacy. It's taken on a significant battle and won. I think the only real question now is it any closer to offering those sport light products that it's wanted to? That it wants to do what Venue wants to be able to. I guess that's the only thing it hasn't really managed to get out of this. But yeah, I think Fubo's in a really good place. It's done really well out of this whole scenario. And yeah, and then the other thing is, of course, Gandler's going to be retain significant influence in that merged entity. And who knows what the future holds for him.
Yeah, and you know what? I will do my part. I'm sure we can convince David to come speak with us at some point. But who knows? Maybe the new Disney merger, they'll clamp down on his public speaking. But he's always been happy to speak to us in the past. So maybe what we can try to do, Steve, is get him back on and get his thoughts through, because it is an interesting story. Just given how long we've been speaking to David, how much everything has changed, that this is a really kind of a significant moment in the history for the business. But going from one streaming business to another, we'll kind of look at, I guess, Netflix and all the things that they had over the Christmas period. For them, we've spent quite a long time talking about the run-up to the NFL games. We've spent a lot of time talking about the WWE, and both of those things debuted over the holiday period. And by all accounts, from what we can tell from the data, is they were setting all sorts of records in terms of both of those product launches. And for me, Steve, watching the game, apart from having to watch the game at my 80-year-old grandmother's house, who we had to install Netflix onto her device and do all those bits, didn't have any issues with the streaming. Like, I thought for all intents and purposes, it looked really well produced. I thought they did some nice things of their own. I heard some nibbles online talking about quality, but I'll be honest, Steve, for what I saw, I thought they did a pretty good job of everything. And I'll let you focus maybe a little bit more on the WWE side when we get to that. But in terms of the NFL stuff, there was a fear, could they stream to that many concurrent live viewers? And it seems like the answer is yes.
Yes, I think that I think I read somewhere that the NFL and Netflix just needed not to be a news story the following day. That was the minimum success, and I think it achieved that quite easily. In terms of the production, I thought production was fine. They had CBS do it. They had a pretty good roster of talent. One thing you wouldn't have seen, I think, because the international ones, we got Scott Hansen from Red Zone. So, they catered for both domestic and international audiences. I mean, the only thing they couldn't really help with the games were kind of stinkers, weren't they? In terms of
unfortunately,
so in terms of how one-sided they were. And one thing I will say is that maybe I wasn't as good a judge as you, because obviously I was watching these 5 hours ahead after I'd consumed more food and drink than you had. So maybe I didn't have quite the eye that you might have. But I thought the production was fine. In terms of the quality, I was at my in-laws, decent internet connection, so absolutely fine. A couple of things to compare to the Jake Paul and Mike Tyson bout, of course. Even though this had a very good international audience, the majority was. I think this was going to be more. It's going to be more US skewed than that bout was, which might have made it easier to distribute in terms of using your CDN technology Netflix were doing. They will obviously have learned from that. They've now done a few major events to get the data. And yeah, from a technical standpoint, I didn't notice anything. I had a look. Yes, there was some complaints about the technical quality of the stream, but this is streaming. There's so many variables, and if you can do as much as you can on your side, there's still going to be issues on the end user side, whether it's connection or device or just momentary issues. But I think Netflix did an absolutely fantastic job, and again they turned it into a mini Christmas Super Bowl with Beyonce. I didn't actually watch that. I think I went to make myself a late snack at the time. But in terms of going beyond sporting audiences, making it a cultural event, Netflix managed it. And of course, great for NFL, associated with Christmas. international audiences on the up, and then being on that front screen of Netflix, you can't really argue with that, can you?
No, and to your point about quality, I don't think the timing made a difference. My grandmother lives in a retirement home, so I'm sure they don't exactly have the world's fastest streaming, although the people in that building might be so old, not a lot of them are using the bandwidth, so you could just say it was readily available, but, didn't have any issues there. And I think to your point as well, one of the things we've always said about streaming is who the demographic is, and, one of the statistics was something about 5.1 million US followers from the ages of 18 to 34, which made it the most watched NFL game from that demographic, which I think that's part of the NFL's mission and objective is that they know certain audiences, although it's free to air, technically making it available for everybody, that might not be where those audiences actually go to consume content. So to everything you talked about, it seems like a success. It's almost like it was the punter. You only know the punter's name when he messes up. And, I think to that extent, like Netflix didn't mess it up, and then they would have hit on some things in the sense of they sold out all their advertising, which for them is really important, which is a new potential revenue stream beyond subscriptions, managed to connect with people that they might not always connect with. And as you say, the whole Beyonce thing, everybody's talking about the Beyonce ball. So they really sort of, I think, ticked a bunch of boxes as well as opening up potential considerations to say, hey, we've done this now. Could we potentially expand?
Yeah, I think that, for everything else that Netflix has done, this is by far and away the most high profile, most important broadcast they've delivered. If you mess this up, NFL fans will let you know, and the NFL will let you know. It was interesting that some of the games were available locally on CBS stations, though, which so the most vocal fans may not have been as vocal because they could watch it over the air. But I think it's a case of taking one of the big leagues, showing you can do it, show you can do it competently, and then next time they're going for something, they can use that to ease any concerns that a rights holder might have that going streaming is not for them.
Yeah. And then on the other side of Netflix, we talked about the WWE. This is obviously your home ground, and I do apologize that I shared some notes that may have included some spoilers as you're catching up. But on the other side, this is a long-term deal. It may be surprised some people when the WWE signed this deal, because of just where the WWE has been historically, and what they've been able to do in terms of building their own platforms in the past, previous to Peacock. And then just, again, for Netflix, doing something large-scale live. But by all accounts, it seems once again, they've managed to be able to pull off a successful live event. So Steve, from the WWE side, are there any further takeaways from that or anything else from a different perspective with that?
I mean, I would say that for WWE, the live element isn't as important as NFL or other events because, I don't watch it live. It's on at 1 o'clock UK time. On a Monday night, and if I'm up at 1 o'clock on a Friday night watching SmackDown, then I've probably been out. So it's probably not the best, not the best audience. So I think in terms of catch up, it's going to be, it's a bit more of like a traditional TV show. With what WWE is allowing Netflix to do is show how it can take on an entire property. It's the first time that anyone's entrusted with it in the US. Of course, it's Raw, which is its flagship show. In globally, it's everything. It started well, in terms of the cultural reach. WWE has been able to use Netflix's reach, its cultural cachet, to, I guess, make it something bigger. I think wrestling has gone through periods where it's been really popular, sometimes, and then gone through periods where it's had an image problem. And I think over the last few years, the success of WWE in streaming and in digital means it's in one of its better periods, and it's now going to go even greater, I think, with Netflix. When WWE first partnered with Peacock, so it basically brought the entire WWE network onto Peacock, it saw viewership go up quite considerably for some of its programming because people had access to Peacock. Like, I fancy checking this out. I used to like wrestling, haven't watched it in a while. Here we go. And I think the same thing's going to happen with Netflix. But having said that, live wasn't an important consideration. I think it was close to 5 million, 4.9 million viewers watched W Raw. They threw everything at that with, people coming back, John Cena, The Rock, The Undertaker, these big names that can command these audiences. In the US, I think it was 2.66 million. which was double the average from the past year. 2.6 million is a great. That's pretty good for wrestling in 2025. That doesn't include people who follow on social or on catch up or on demand. So I think it's been a good start. But crucially for Netflix, this audience is quite an engaged, quite a passionate audience. So it's going to keep people coming. It's going to keep people subscribing. And if they can build on that and make it even bigger, this is going to be a great acquisition. I think you're right. It did surprise a lot of people when they first went for it, but it's probably quite a cost-effective acquisition. It's going to have, these two brands together can have significant cross-promotional benefits as well. I mean, it already seems to be a success. I didn't think it's been anything other than a success, if I'm being honest. And I think the early signs are really good. Obviously, we're only on episode 1. Episode 2 is this week. So yeah, good start. I think both WWE and Netflix will be delighted.
And before we switch over to talk about Amazon, only because Jay Marine, who I believe is sort of the new head of sports for Amazon Prime streaming, he talked about the potential existential threat of Netflix coming into a marketplace that, would have had one less competitor. Do you think the success of these two is only going to embolden Netflix to step up the live sports, or do you think it could potentially take an Amazon type approach where, yes, it's got the WWE, but things like the NFL or whatever future rights it might do might be a strategic approach where it's the Christmas Day games or it's a certain holiday set of games, quickly, just sort of, do you think Netflix will feel emboldened to make bigger moves now?
Yes, it's not stopping here. It now sees the value of sport. It's still only really dipped its toes in the water. It's going to go for more. Amazon's probably a good example to follow. Amazon's also been quite selective. It's gone for properties that push the needle, but it's not gone for comprehensive deals. It's gone for parts of the top properties. So, Thursday Night Football, certain parts of the NBA in the US. I would expect to see more. I don't know what it will go for. I mean, a lot of the contracts are still tied up, but the deal for the Women's World Cup suggests that it is also loosening its belief that these deals need to be global. Those were US specific, and that was something it's always said that was the issue with sport, is it's fragmented. So we could see some country specific deals.
Yeah, be very interesting. But we will now transition to another giant of the streaming game, which is Amazon Prime. But Steve, this is almost going to be a little bit more of a kind of a sending off, a farewell. One of the, I would argue, probably my favorite time of the year when it came to the Premier League was in December, when Amazon would be the broadcast partners for the Premier League. And basically over, I believe it's the last 6 years, Steve, they've held on to those rights. I think they did something about 128 total games, although I'm not quite sure how that math works out, because basically they paid for 2 rounds of 10 game segments in December. So I'm not quite 100% sure how you get to 128 games and you're dividing things in by those numbers. But nonetheless, they've had those. Basically, they've had early Christmas window and then around the Boxing Day window. And I think my favorite thing about it was it's the only time the Premier League's ever given you the choice to pick and choose which game you want to watch. I, for one, Steve, will be a little sad to see the games being moved from Amazon Prime, but that's the way it is. So, Steve, maybe just what were your thoughts on Amazon's venture with the Premier League while they had it?
Just going to clarify one thing, and I don't quote this. I imagine the extra games have come from lockdown. When all the games on TV, I think that's probably where the extra 8 have come from, and that's why your math is off. Look, I think Amazon coming in was an interesting experiment for the Premier League, and the Premier League, they basically created this cut price package for Amazon. I think Amazon paid next to nothing for these matches, and the idea was to popularize the concept of a streamer coming in and showing football in the UK, and it worked. I think we in the UK, where we don't get every Premier League game live, it was a novelty to have choice of whatever match you wanted to watch. Amazon's coverage very well received because it was all of your favorite commentators and pundits, some you haven't seen before. Whether it's Clive Tildesley, who's a renowned commentator in the UK, doing some of the matches, or return of Jeff Stelling, who is our Scott Hansen. It does Soccer Saturday. I did Soccer Saturday for many years. And again, for Amazon, it was an interesting use case to test how it could get involved in sport in the UK, how its live infrastructure would work, and we've seen it build on that with things like the Champions League and rugby and other events, and of course it's invested in sport in other markets as well. Of course, it's involved with Premier League predates it going exclusive for Thursday night football. So this was a really important test case. And it was a good piece of PR for Amazon because they could position themselves as making the Premier League affordable for 20 games a season. But that's quite easy to give it away at no extra cost when you're a multi-billion-dollar corporation who's paying £30 million a year for these matches. So it was a very easy way to position it itself as that. But I thought the coverage was great. I thought the proposition was easily understandable, and it was affordable, and it's set the template for what they're going to do in other sports and other markets. However, you will be able to choose what game you want from next season. You just have to get TNT Sports, which I think now have the package, and they also do have a couple of packages of all 10 matches, including one this week. So I think every Premier League game is available on TNT Sports this week. So it's still going to happen. The new Premier League deal comes into effect in August, and there's been more games than ever before. But yeah, it's been an interesting period for the Premier League. I think Amazon did a lot of things that fans have liked, and judging by the sentiment on social media after the last match, they are going to be missed. But I think that's probably more the affordability standpoint.
Yeah, and I think for context, like I mentioned, the deal had been for essentially 20 games a season when the Premier League restructured, and we've talked about this as a way to try to drive up the value of their media rights, is they're going to offer more games than they ever have before. So yes, they made more money, but as Nick commonly likes to phrase, they're actually making less money per game. But the 20 game package that, as you said, was kind of a bespoke product offered to Amazon. Now the smallest package available was 56 games, and it was reported that was going to cost more than 10 times what Amazon was currently paying. And we just spoke about it a little bit earlier in sort of Netflix following the Amazon model. Amazon has largely been, I guess you could say, strategic and opportunistic when it comes to media rights. And I guess just the degree of how much more they were going to have to take on, how much more is going to cost, it just didn't fit the model with what they were going to try to achieve with sports.
Yeah, I think that's it. If you want Amazon getting a bigger package, wouldn't fit what it's trying to do. If it got 56 games, it's not necessarily going to help it achieve what it wants. It's not always going to have first choice games. I don't think it's going to be as compelling proposition to keep people subscribing, at least not for the money. Whereas instead it's going to the Champions League, where it gets first pick of every round, so it can pick the best tie. And that's over, the new Champions League format means that's, it goes across the entire season as well. So it just made more sense for redirectors resources towards the Champions League.
Yeah. Now, in terms of what's next for Amazon, there was a recent interview with Jay Marine, who I mentioned, sort of leading up the sports department there, post Marie Donahue, and what that leads next. And, there's some things that were potentially thrown out there. We do know the UFC, who's also part of the TKO group, has an upcoming deal as their current deal with ESPN's expiring. There's also been potential rumors, although the MLB does have their deal locked down through 2028. ESPN has a break clause after 2025. So at least from a U.S. perspective, we know a lot of the major rights are locked down, but there are some things that are out there. And then there's always ways to create new things. We've seen the NFL is always willing to create new stuff. Not that they would for Amazon, because they've already got the Thursday night package. But, now that they've stepped away from the Premier League, they have brought in Champions League. Where potentially do you think there is space for Amazon to continue to grow, or will they continue to do what they've done on a market by market basis?
I mean, I think they are going to continue to evaluate each market by its merits and see what it would take to break into each of them. In some areas, for example, it's got sub-licensing deals with Premier League in the Nordics. It identifies what's going to move the needle. With regards to with Jay Marine, he was asked about MLB, he was asked about UFC. UFC is an interesting one. I think there's going to be a lot of attention or a lot of interest in that from ESPN. I think seeing Netflix, that's an area I think Netflix can go forward, fit in with their portfolio, and now they have that relationship with TKO Group with WWE. That could be something that would interest them, and I can see why Amazon would be interested in the UFC. Baseball, I think, is harder to see what they do with, because if you look at baseball, you look at things that move the needle. It's World Series and it's playoffs, and baseball interest tends to be inherently local. It's been quite difficult for ESPN and others to create national interest in some of these games, which is why we've had, we nearly always have Yankees and Red Sox on Sunday Night Baseball for years when it was on, and at least that's what we seem like in the UK. So I don't know how they move the needle with MLB unless it's a very specific time slot, whether it's includes playoffs, includes World Series, which I don't think is going to be possible with this cycle. So yeah, I think it's whether they want to bolster out their offering rather than move the needle. I think with the MLB, and if they can, they can get something in the summer to keep people subscribing around. But I think it's just going to be. They said they're going to take a look at everything. They know when these contracts are up for grabs. They know it's hard to take it off for incumbent. I guess it's just what's going to move the needle for them. In Europe, that's soccer. In the US, of course, it's football. It's NBA. So yeah, I think still expect to see moves, but they've been very careful, very disciplined, and I don't think they're going to change that, because the minute they look like they're going to splash out on anything, the cost is just going to go up for them. So. Yeah, I think more of the same from Amazon. Expect them to assess everything. Wouldn't be surprised if they made a move for UFC.
Yeah. Now, moving to a story I know Nick will be desperate to talk about on his return, is speaking about DAZN. And for me, this is a bit of an interesting story in terms of their acquisition of Australia's Foxtel group. I find it interesting for a couple of reasons. One of the things we've talked about is DAZN have, been very strategic in their market by market approach. There's not necessarily a consistency to what they've done to every market, other than, I guess, just being opportunistic. I guess what it is either getting niche rights in big countries or getting the top rights in a smaller market. And that's not to say Germany or Spain or Italy are small, but it's not the same as competing for the Premier League in the UK or the NFL in the US. But I also find it interesting because, like, my presumption is this isn't just, Foxtel isn't just a sports business. They've got all kinds of broader businesses, and I just find it interesting that they're trying to make things work. They've now acquired Foxtel for US $2.2 billion. I want to be careful about that because I know the Australians also use the dollar. So, it is not a small acquisition. It's I guess the other thing is Australia is a very sports crazy culture, from what I've been told. I've been told their sports fandomness is just as high as crazy Americans. And only that, because they've had things, I think of KO Sports or Optus, like they have a familiarity with streaming. So it's not as if they're trying to go to a marketplace and introduce streaming somewhere that isn't native, I suppose, to the local demographic. So it's I'm trying to figure it out. It's a very big move, but just interested in what you take on it, Steve, because I know Nick's going to have all kinds of thoughts when he gets back.
Yeah, I'm a bit nervous about addressing this subject when, I can imagine Nick in his car listening to this, just screaming at us for not doing the topic justice or saying something wrong. So I'll give my best shot. Australia, it's a sports mad nation. Being an Englishman and a Brit, we have our rivalries with them, and we share a lot of similar sports culture in many ways, and it's obviously very different in others. This is an interesting move by DAZN because it's a major acquisition, and as you say, they're not just buying a content business; they're buying a services business as well. Foxtel was Australia's main, I guess, pay TV provider. Really sort of pioneered it in the 90s when it launched, and sport and content was a way for them to shift these services and these subscriptions. Of course, we all know the market's changed. There's been a little bit of disaggregation between content and distributions because of streaming and the networks involved in delivering that. Broadband in Australia has improved significantly over the last decade. There's been some government projects and just availability. So streaming is gaining popularity. And then there's another quirk of the Australian market in that there's this really powerful piece of government legislation that keeps a fair amount of rights reserved for free-to-air TV. So in the US, it's commercial forces that keeps a lot of this stuff on free-to-air TV. In Australia, there's more legislative hand in making that happen. And the two companies that owned Foxtel are Telstra, which is the country's biggest telco, and News Corp, which I think we all know News Corp are in terms of the newspaper and empire that they've got, and they decided it was just time to they're interested in selling, so that they could all the businesses would be able to compete with in a streaming world. You mentioned KO Sports, that emergence of that. Australians are very comfortable idea of streaming live sport now, and it's just, I guess, when you've got a marketplace with legacy pay TV services, new streaming players, and then the presence of about I guess four public broadcast, not just four free-to-air broadcasters like Channel 9, 7, ABC, etc. And then you throw in global players like Netflix and Amazon. It all, the economics of the old world kind of become challenged, and it's all a bit complicated. So DAZN will see this as an opportunity to build out its service in Australia. It's a new market, and but maybe better place to take advantage of this streaming first landscape that's emerging in Australia. I imagine Nick is screaming at this point that I've oversimplified everything, not mentioned enough of the strategic implications. But the important thing for DAZN is it's got a new market. It's got really premium rights to attack with, and it'll be hoping to I guess apply some economies of scale when it comes to technology and to other things. I think the big question for me is how it being this disruptive force, how it manages a lot of this legacy business that it's acquired. How does that fit in with a company like DAZN? But yeah, I think it's a really interesting move, and DAZN just continue to last, I guess, 4 years or something, just doubling down in key markets, expanding into new ones. It's part of that growth story.
Well, I think the point you made there about the premium rights, I mentioned, that's sort of been their strategies, either go into a smaller market or a market it feels it can compete in and go grab the top rights. And that's what they're going to be able to do with this. My understanding is, Foxtel already has access to the AFL and the NRL, which are the two biggest domestic sports leagues. So it allows them entry into a country and already has direct access to those big things, as opposed to having to go in and necessarily go into a bidding war, or perhaps not have an established audience. They're going to be able to get that from day one. I think one of the interesting things will be, again, we talk about DAZN because we know it, we live it, we talk about it all the time. But I'm in Ohio, and I mentioned the darts is on DAZN, but as soon as I mention, everyone's like, "I thought you mean DAZN?" Like, I would be curious to know to what degree. I mean, obviously, DAZN's got the global rights to the NFL. I don't know to what degree they were involved in Australia before then, but are they going to have sort of that thing that they've got, even in the US as they try to expand, still just trying to get a little brand name recognition, similar to what you were talking about with Fubo earlier in the podcast, that we know Fubo, but doesn't necessarily mean that, my mom will have no idea who Fubo is. My mom's got no idea who DAZN is. Like, and that's not the biggest, thing at the end of the world. My mom's not the biggest sports fan, but like, I'd be curious to know how well known they're already in Australia.
I imagine it's international service. I don't think there's a localized service for DAZN. So it'll be, if you're a fan of, I guess, combat sports, again, as you say, NFL Game Pass, the other bits, the Women's Champions League, that'll be the offering that'll be at present. So it'll be able, it's going to be an entirely new market in terms of a local offering is. And yeah, I think that is a very interesting point about DAZN in terms of brand awareness. I still don't know if it's that well known in the UK. I think people still don't really know it unless they're boxing fans because of that. And that was something that became apparent when I was reading. I think I was listening to a podcast. And they were talking about the Ligue 1 deal in France, and the person still felt obligated to explain how to pronounce DAZN. So, yeah. Do you know what I mean? There is it is true, but if you look at the rights offering will speak for itself. Like I think it would be pretty, in terms of brand awareness, it was solved pretty easily once consumers are aware that this is, what Foxtel was. These are the rights that it has. I don't think awareness is an issue. I think it's more about how you take what was a fairly analog business, albeit one that had made moves into streaming, and make it digitally native.
Yeah, well, we'll move on from there because we know Nick will have thoughts, and we don't want him to get upset by anything we have or have not said. So I think we've covered this enough that people have a general idea, but I'm sure there'll be more to come on this particular topic, Steve, when Nick is back at the helm. But the last story we want to cover today, bit of an interesting one. Again, we talk about disruptors, and certainly a sport that has seen a little bit of disruption over the last few years. And also one I think you've been following a little bit, trying to interview some different people from their team. And we finally had the debut of the tech-infused golf league, the TGL, co-founded by Tiger Woods and Rory McIlroy. I know there were some issues. I think a roof caved in at one point, and trying to get it all going. But it seems as though it's finally had a successful first launch. I believe broadcast was just around 1 million people, which I believe was compared to the average performance of a pretty good college basketball game. So, it's not competing with the NFL or anything like that, but it is a new sport. But Steve, it's taken a while to get to this point, and now it's finally there. How would you sort of describe the launch of finally getting TGL on the air?
Yeah, I'm going to prefix this by saying nothing is competing the NFL. Like its own, you got NFL 1, college football 2, big gap. Yeah, I like the way you also wanted to play the troubles it had at launch. I think the roof caved in at some point. Yes, it did. Yeah. And I've spoken to the chief executive, Mike McCarley, a couple of times now over the last couple of years about the project, and I find it a really fascinating enterprise. It seems, for me, it's a rare example of just looking at how technology can create something entirely new in sport. I think it is technologically very impressive. That I think is fairly plain for everyone to see. But yes, it launched after a year's delay. Essentially, there was a power failure at the venue which caused the roof to collapse, which meant when weather came in, it just destroyed the roof. And the delay that incurred an already pretty ambitious launch schedule meant it couldn't be absorbed by ESPN. ESPN, it has to happen these days or it can't happen. And of course, broadcast is so important to this. To not be on ESPN's main network was just seen as catastrophic. So they decided, let's delay it by a year. And that's allowed them to refine a lot of things, both from the tech side. I think the venue has got a permanent roof now. So they've been able to spend a year just building everything out from proposition, facilities, etc. And yeah, by all accounts, it was a pretty successful launch. That audience is pretty decent. I mean, anything around 1 million is pretty good. You look at like even an NBA game on cable will get less than 2 million. Like, that's the sort of leagues we're playing in here. The NFL is an anomaly. Don't compare anything to the NFL. It's like cricket in India. Don't. And it's a new thing for people to get used to. It got a younger audience, in terms of demographic. It peaked at the right times. Yeah, sure, there will be a novelty factor. I'm sure that's the case. But of course, this week, Tiger Woods is up. And we all know what Tiger Woods could do for PGA Tour ratings. So he's probably going to have a similar impact on TGL, especially given that he doesn't really play golf anymore because of his injuries. So, yeah, I think successful first week. I think everyone involved will be happy, especially after all the work it took to get to this point. I think it would be interesting to see how it performs over the course of the season. I think, whether it will sustain interest beyond that initial novelty. I want to see a bit more competitive. I didn't really like all the joking and high fives. Not for me. I like my sport to be serious, but that can happen over time. And I think if you can make TGL appear, golf could learn from darts. In all honesty, in terms of the atmosphere, obviously, in terms of that venue, but also in darts, you have tournaments, and then you have the Premier League darts, which is a semi-invitational league over 12 weeks in the early part of the year, TGL could be seen as that. This is, something that sits alongside traditional golf, and it means a lot because there's money in it. And I think that's where it needs to get to be a success. But yeah, I enjoyed it. I watched it. I just think that maybe they should, it's a bit more refinement. There's no wind on the simulator, which I thought was a missed opportunity. But yeah, no, I think it's off to a good start. I'm intrigued to see where it goes.
Well, interesting with the darts. I know one of the complaints when Luke Littler was playing in his quarterfinals and his semifinals round, it was too friendly. His two opponents, Aspinall and how have I forgotten his name? They're a little too friendly, and I agree. I think there does need to be a bit of competition. But I think one of the interesting things TGL has is we've seen a number of sports do this, right? Cricket always had the test series, and then it went down to kind of the T20 to make it better for the viewing audience, to change it up. Baseball's had to change rules to speed up the game. We've seen even basketball, the introduction of the big three, that there is a desire, and I guess you could say a requirement that, as you say, you can't just be the NFL or the Premier League and just be the best of the best. If you're not, you got to have some differences. And, it almost reminds me of cricket a little bit, where not everybody's going to tune in to watch, the Masters from Thursday to Sunday. Some people are just going to tune in for the Sunday. And I think having something different, and it is totally different, but just being able to provide a different experience, but similar names and similar sport is kind of necessary these days.
And the other thing about TGL that's got is loads of people play sim golf. In Korea, for example, it's the main form of the game because there's, a lot of countries don't have golf courses. There's not the space. People don't have time to go out to play. Lots of people play sim golf. So this is part of the sport already, but it's your top professionals participating in it. So it does fit. I can see how it fits in the ecosystem. I'm a little bit of a natural skeptic when you see X sport trying to create the 2020 version of their sport. I've always been a bit skeptical of that. It's maybe because I'm too old, or maybe because I just don't really see the value in it. With this, I do. I think it's a really interesting concept. I think they've gone about it the right way. The tech is really impressive, and yeah, the proof will be in the viewing figures and how well it does.
Yep, I'll make sure to drop a note. I think Twitter, you're not on X. I'll say Twitter just to rub it in. I believe Twitter has a couple bots where you can say, remind me on this day, something like that. And I'll be like, remind me of this TGL conversation. And we'll see how the numbers have done over the last, the future 12 months from here.
Yeah, and also they are going to have some tee-off times for European audiences as well, I think, when there's US public holiday. So is it President's Day that's soon?
Yeah, I believe it's in February.
Yeah, so I think they'll have an earlier time slot to capture some of the audiences there. So that might be time for you to check it out, Chris, if you're not doing anything else.
You know me, I'm only watching sports, so I'm sure I'll find a way. Well, Steve, I appreciate you joining me for this first podcast of Streamtime Sports in 2025. Hope everyone, like I said, had a good new year, and we'll bring lots of content throughout the year for you. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
Now, before you go, if you liked what you heard today, be sure to rate and review and just let me know what you think on social. You can find me on most social platforms as SportsProNick. And please do spread the word of the podcast. There's no better way of marketing than word of mouth, whether that be in person or on social media. And if you don't like what you've heard, or you think we should be doing more or less of something, then reach out and let me know, as I'd love to hear from you. Thanks, Streamtimers. Until next time.